It all began as what seemed to be a typical love story, one that held the promise of a happy ending. I had always believed that my wife, Elena, and I were one of those couples destined to weather any storm that life might throw our way. However, the moment I stumbled upon the truth, everything I held dear began to shatter. It wasn't an abrupt fracture, but rather a slow, terrifying descent into suspicion, starting with signs that at first appeared to be small and innocuous. The long hours at her office became a growing concern. I noticed how she would return home late, utterly exhausted, her eyes lacking the warmth they once held. Initially, I dismissed these signs, convincing myself that every marriage goes through phases. Perhaps she was simply stressed from her demanding job, I reasoned. But as days turned into weeks, the excuses began to pile up. "I have to stay late again," she would say, her eyes glued to her phone, barely meeting my gaze. Then came the weekends away. "It's a company retreat. I can't get out of it." With each excuse, the distance between us grew more pronounced, almost palpable. I observed how she recoiled when I reached out to touch her, the warmth that once radiated from her body now a memory. The absence of intimacy became glaringly apparent, leading me to question myself. Had I been neglecting her? Was I no longer enough? These doubts gnawed at my insides, creating a pit of anxiety that I couldn't shake. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible in the life we had built together. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. The uncertainty was suffocating, and I decided to hire Ross, a private investigator renowned for his blunt approach to uncovering the truth. I didn't want to hear comforting lies. I needed the cold, hard facts. After just a week of surveillance, Ross delivered the devastating news. Elena was cheating on me with her boss, Greg Holloway. The mere mention of his name twisted my stomach into knots. Greg embodied charm and success, the kind of man who effortlessly drew admiration from women and envy from men. Ross handed me a folder filled with evidence that confirmed my worst fears. Inside were grainy black and white photographs of Elena and Greg together at a hotel, their bodies entwined in a manner that was both intimate and heart-wrenching. Her hands rested on his chest, while his lips caressed her throat. I stared at the images, each one a sharp reminder of the betrayal I was enduring. It felt as if the weight of the world was pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. Yet, instead of breaking down, I forced a smile at Ross and said, "Thank you. Now let's make them pay." I chose not to confront Elena immediately. That would have been too easy, too predictable. Instead, I opted to observe her, to memorize her movements, her excuses, and her lies. I played the role of the oblivious husband, all the while meticulously planning my revenge. Every moment spent in her company became a test of endurance. She would come home late, the scent of hotel soap clinging to her, and I would kiss her cheek, pretending not to notice. She would lie to me, and I would nod, feigning belief. All the while, rage simmered just beneath the surface, but I held it back, knowing that revenge required patience. The night I finally decided to reveal my knowledge was orchestrated with meticulous care. I prepared a lavish dinner, wanting the atmosphere to be intimate yet deceptive, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within me. I cooked her favorite meal, a perfectly cooked filet mignon paired with asparagus and roasted garlic mashed potatoes, all complemented by an expensive bottle of red wine that she had often begged me to save for special occasions. Tonight was special, but for very different reasons. Elena walked in late, looking immaculate, her makeup fresh, and a new scent of perfume wafting around her. She thought she was clever, masking the smell of another man, but I had memorized all her scents. I poured her a glass of wine, remarking that I thought we deserved a nice evening together. I noticed a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, but she sat down nonetheless. As we ate in silence, I observed her closely, noting her nervousness as she gripped her fork too tightly, her mind undoubtedly racing. Halfway through the meal, I leaned back casually, swirling my wine. Then, I mentioned that I had an interesting conversation with Ross. The moment I spoke his name, I saw the color drain from her face. I pulled out the folder, sliding it across the table toward her. "You do know him," I said softly, watching her expression shift from confusion to dread. She hesitated, but ultimately opened the folder, her face paling as the photograph stared back at her, each image a reminder of her betrayal. Silence enveloped us like a heavy blanket, the air thick with tension. I could see her mind racing, caught between denial and the impending confession. "Elena," I said gently, "I'm not going to scream or hit you, and I'm certainly not going to ask why. I already know." Her eyes filled with tears, and I raised a hand to stop her. "Save it. I don't want an apology. I want a choice." "What choice?" she asked, confusion and panic etching her features. "You will tell Greg it's over," I instructed, leaning in closer. "You will make him beg for you. Make him believe he's losing the greatest thing in his life." Her eyes widened in alarm, panic flickering within them. I continued, "And if you don't—" I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "Then the real fun begins." She flinched at my words, recognizing that the illusion of control she had maintained was slipping away. Caught between the life we had built together and the fantasy she had chased with Greg, I had positioned her where she had to choose. She exhaled shakily, finally relenting. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, as she lay beside me, her body tense and distant, I stared at the ceiling, knowing this was just the beginning. The next evening, she called, her voice trembling as she shared that Greg had said he would do anything to keep her. I chuckled, a sense of satisfaction welling up inside me. "Now what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Choose him or me," I instructed. After a long, agonizing silence, she whispered that she chose him. What she didn't realize was that I had already set a trap for Greg. His company was embroiled in financial misconduct, and I had obtained documents proving his fraudulent activities. The following morning, the SEC launched an investigation, and in a spectacular public downfall, Greg was arrested. Meanwhile, every email and message exchange between Elena and Greg leaked online, exposing her for the manipulative cheater she had become. She lost her job, her reputation, and everything she had built. The last time I saw her, she sat in our empty house, staring at divorce papers, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anguish. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her emotions. I leaned in close, my words measured and cold, devoid of the warmth that had once defined our relationship. "Because you thought you could betray me and walk away unscathed." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words emerged. I turned and walked away, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. In the end, her choice had cost her everything, and my careful planning had ensured that her betrayal would lead to her complete destruction.